So nice and easy, this is how it looks. And I'll start with the three key relationships. They are, you still have a self-managed fund with its members governed by a self-managed fund deed. Okay. The lender lends money over to the superannuation fund under a regular loan agreement, albeit one that's expressed to be limited recourse. It's the trustees of the fund that have the obligation to make repayments back to the bank under that loan agreement. The money that's paid is used to acquire an asset, which I've represented down here, deliberately, separately from the other super assets, because this is one that's held under a custody arrangement. The super fund trustees can't hold the title to that asset themselves, so they appoint a custodian to hold the asset under a custody deed, which is also being referred to as a bare trust. They say it's a very simple document. The trustees say to the custodian, can you please hold this asset until the bank or we direct you to return it to us. So that custodian holds legal title, so they'd hold the certificate of title to the property. They grant the registered mortgage back to the bank, which is the bank's primary form of security. And the custodian is the only person who can do that because it is the registered proprietor. It holds the legal title. So the bank has its registered mortgage, and really the three or the four key documents. You still need a self-managed fund deed. That causes some confusion. You need a custody deed to appoint the custodian, the loan agreement between the bank and the fund, and the registered mortgage granted by the custodian to the bank. All pretty simple. What some banks are doing, and Fiona will talk about this in a little more detail, is requiring personal guarantees, be it from members or other persons outside the fund, which says that in the event that the fund defaults under this loan agreement, the bank can turn to this person who becomes a guarantor and says you have to make up the difference on any loss of equity that we've suffered. There are a couple of legal issues around these, and we'll revisit those shortly also. I'll come back to the personal guarantee disclaimer in that context when we're talking about that in greater detail. But I mean, the real reason that personal guarantees are more relevant in this area is because of the limited recourse nature of the bank's rights against the super fund. This is non-bank lending, so I just refer to it as related party lending. Most often it will be some party that's related to the fund who's lending the money into the super fund. Let's just forget about these two diagrams here and focus on the related party lending first. The member, say, is able to loan money to the superannuation fund under a loan agreement, and the repayments are made by the fund to the member. Again, you still need your SMSF deed between the trustees and the members. Again, the money is applied in order to purchase an asset which is a super asset but separate from the other assets of the super fund. The trust still has to appoint a custodian to hold legal title to that asset, and the custodian still grants a registered mortgage back to the member, being the lender in this example. So obviously no bank there. I don't have personal guarantees because if the lending is by a related party, then they're unlikely to insist on a personal guarantee being given in support. The reason I've put this up here is to say, well, if you've got some asset, if your clients have some asset outside super, that say they have equity in, like a home or a business premises, then it's possible for the member in their personal capacity to approach the bank and say, I've got equity in this property, can I actually loan the money from you? I'll give you a registered mortgage over that property. We'll enter into a loan agreement. I'll pay you back and I'll give you a mortgage. The member then has a pool of money here which it can loan into the super fund under one of these arrangements. And provided the bank's comfortable with their exposure outside super, then they're not too concerned with what you're doing with the money here, and that could be, you then start a new loan arrangement whereby the member loans that money into the fund. Just one comment on the custodian. There are no restrictions in the Act on who the custodian can and can't be. The only restrictions are implied by law. So I came up with a nifty phrase to keep in mind when you're deciding who should be the custodian in these arrangements. And the focus should be on making sure it's someone with a different legal personality. Different legal personality from the trustee, different of the super fund, different legal personality from the members of the super fund. So if I give the example of a corporate trustee of my own fund, with myself and my wife as members of that fund, the custodian should not be the same company that's the corporate trustee of our fund. It should not be both myself and my wife jointly as custodians. And the reason there is, in either of those cases, it's arguable that there's a merger of the legal title that's held by the custodian and the beneficial title. So the beneficial title could be characterised as, say, the interest of the super fund trustees when they give the legal title to the custodian, or the ultimate beneficial ownership which resides with the members of that fund. It's a little more complex than that, but that's probably the best approach. Again, so what are the solutions in that instance? You could have either me or my wife as the custodian. There's no restrictions on that. You could incorporate another company which you and your wife control. That would be acceptable also. So there aren't any there's no prudential regulation of that. The only issue is to make sure that there's some separation of beneficial title and legal title. And that's probably a good opportunity to ask if there are any questions, having gone through all of that structuring discussion, if there are any. So what we'll do, just to finish off before I hand over to Fiona, is just contrast this arrangement with what the ATO how the ATO described an instalment warrant. They described it as an instalment warrant is a means by which you can acquire an asset over time. But what in fact is happening is the super fund purchases the asset from outside super and puts it into super at the outset. So they get ownership of that asset from the beginning, albeit that they use this mechanism for the holding of legal title. When it's not the case that when all the repayments are made to the bank, then they get ownership and control of the asset. They have ownership and control from the outset. And that's a key difference, because if you think about it, that's how a home loan works. You go and purchase your house, but you still have an obligation to make repayments. Whereas the ATO's description is really, well, under these instalment warrants, like a terms contract for purchasing land, you don't actually own the asset until you've made all of the repayments. And that's why I say, what are they really? Well, they're really limited recourse lending arrangements.